talk about exception handling a little bit. By default, Web API is pretty simple. If you get any kind of unhandled error in your code, it's going to be turned into an HTTP 500 status, internal server error. There is another option if you want to start taking slightly more control, because really returning a 500 is pretty bad. It suggests to most people there's a bug. So really it's a good idea to take more control. And one of the basic ways of doing that is you have the option of throwing an HTTP response exception. So this allows you to return an HTTP fail status, but where you've got some level of control over what that status is. So you want to return one of the 400s, one of the fail statuses, not one of the 500s, typically. There is an enum in system.net called HTTP status code that defines all of the common status codes. So basically you throw an HTTP exception and pass the appropriate status code that you want to return to the client. So the example code here is the solution to one of our problems where we're saying find first or default, and if it doesn't find it, it gets a null. Well, rather than returning a null to the client, it would be better to return a 404 not found, and so on. And that's exactly what this code will do. That is the basics of exception handling. We will look at some other mechanisms in a moment. These are the common status codes that tend to get used in Web API type scenarios. And again, we've seen most of these when we looked at the 200s, 300s, and so on. So OK is our success and I'm returning data, versus no content, which still means it was successful, but I'm not returning any data. So I did a create successfully, for example, and I'm not returning any data to you. Now, this is one of the areas that you might choose to cheat. Technically, by the letter of the law, to be RESTful, a create is a post, and the appropriate return status is, well, created in this case. There's another one there specifically for created. And to use the location header to return a URL of the item that was created. But this is one of those areas where I would personally say, it's probably okay to cheat a little bit. You know, I can return a body from a post request, so why wouldn't I include the ID of the new thing that just got created in that response body and make it easy for them to access? To me, that's okay. I'm okay with breaking the rules a little bit like that. It's a choice. You know, some of these we talked about earlier. Unauthorized, bad request just means you sent something that it didn't understand, service unavailable, those kind of things. So you can, if you wish, plug in some code that returns HTTP response exception in individual operations. You can also, if you want to sort of automate that process to a certain extent, there is also something called an exception filter. So this is basically your way of writing code one time and having it plugged in generically and changing the default behavior of the service as a whole, rather than having to do specific error handling in specific scenarios. So you can create an exception filter class. So this is a class that extends from the exception filter attribute class, and basically you can then plug this into the Web API pipeline, and basically whenever an unhandled exception occurs, except for when HTTP response exception is thrown, so you can still throw response exception and this will not come into play, but any other kind of exception, this will happen. And basically, rather than returning a 500, you'll wind up in here and you can provide some generic code over what it is you want to do. In this example, we're saying we've got an unhandled exception, but if it's a key not same exception or an end of file exception, change the exception status to status code.not found. So now, if our Synergy code throws a key not same or an end of file, it will automatically get turned into a 404, going back to the client, and we don't need to provide any specific code to do that. Once we've got an exception filter, we can plug it into the pipeline, and the way we actually do that is it's an attribute class, so we actually decorate the operation or the class, either way. You can either do it at the class level or the operation level, and we just declare that attribute on the operation to get that default error handling behavior, either in specific operations or at the class level. Also, if you want to, it can be plugged in at the global level across all controllers. And that's probably an appropriate thing to do, certainly with the thing that we've just looked at. So again, that would be a little tweak in that configuration file that we looked at earlier, where the default route was declared, config.filters.add, and we just simply add the filter in there. And now it's just going to happen everywhere. If there's any kind of unhandled exception, it'll run it through that filter. let's tweak our class a little bit and improve some things with exception handling. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go back to Postman, and we are going to run our getPerson1, except we're not. We're going to do a getPerson11, which we've done before, and we noticed it returns that null to us. But it's saying success, null. It's not kind of very good, is it? So let's go back to our code, and what we're going to do is I'm going to change the code up a little bit. So instead of just saying return people.firstOrDefault, which could result in null if it's not found, I'm just doing variation on a theme. I'm still doing my people.firstOrDefault, but I'm trapping the response and saying if the response is null, throw an HTTP status.notFound. And again, you'll notice that I need to control period to bring in the system.net namespace. No, that one's already in there. Okay? So now we're going to return a person or a 404 not found. Okay, so if we do a build, we should be able to just flip straight back to Postman. Now it's going to do its build the first time, of course, so there'll be a short delay. But now we should get, we're not getting null in the body, and we're getting a 404 not found instead. There's a simple way of dealing with that basic kind of error handling. Let's look at a similar situation that we've got going on in our put method. Because our put method, our update, is currently saying 204 no content, even though a person might not be found, because it's using basically the same mechanism as the get. So I'm going to grab a piece of existing code, go over to Visual Studio and look at our put method. And again, here we're saying first or default, and if it's not null, we're doing the update, but if it is, we're just ignoring it. Okay? So let's just swap out this code a little bit. Again, variation on a theme, but now we're saying existing person is first or default. If existing person is null, throw a not found. Same thing. Okay, I'm not going to go through every one of these and test them. We've seen one. We don't need to see all of them. We've got a similar scenario going on in our delete method. So let's also improve that code, because earlier we saw that it says you delete someone who doesn't exist. It just says, yeah, I did it. So let's fix that one up as well. And again, same mechanism. If the person to delete is not found, now clearly this would be based on ISAM end of file and key not same errors and that kind of stuff normally. This is just, I'm doing the first or default because of my hard-coded collection of data. But again, same thing, we'll throw a not found if that one doesn't work. And that's given us some basic improvements to our error handling scenario. All right, let's just build that to make sure everything's okay. And it should be.